I don't expect Dante Moore to be a Heisman finalist this year. I do expect him to be really good.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. So it's a great day. It is. And by the way, I'm doing the show from back in Oregon. Outlook on the offensive line, I think, is quite good now and in the future. Des Patman, Oregon legend. If you don't know, you will know later on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So, Dante Moore has not been named Oregon's starting quarterback. I don't expect him to be. I don't know that Dan Lanning will ever do that. They might take the Michigan approach or just, be in that same sort of headspace. Yeah, we don't need to name nobody for nothing. We know internally. And I'm like, okay, all right. I get it. I'd still do an entire show about it if he did name Dante Moore starting quarterback. Let's presume that he is, just for the sake of he's really talented. Calibrating expectations is something I talk about a lot here on the show. And some of you are more bullish about what Dante Moore will be this year than I am. That doesn't mean I don't think he should be good. And there is some historical precedent for this. So I've talked about Dante Moore throughout the spring, and this question came in, and you can submit your questions as well. You can submit your hot takes, something for Spencer's Scale of Agreement, all that stuff, YouTube comments, Twitter, become a Locked On Ducks insider, all that stuff. So Ron sent this one in, talking about Dante Moore, because I mentioned, he hasn't started a full season, gonna have some growing pains. And Ron said, so what growing pains did Mariota have? He was really good from the get-go. Well, fact check true. The arguably greatest player in the history of Oregon football was really good from the moment he set foot on the turf at Autzen Stadium. I remember watching that Arkansas State game vividly, and he was making throws that were so accurate, I couldn't believe exactly what I was watching, and I understood why Darren Thomas had transferred out. But Mariota's stats that season, I actually think, are a pretty good baseline for what I expect for Dante Moore. But there are a couple of caveats in there, but Mariota's stats the first year that he started in 2012, the only year he and Chip Kelly were together, 68.5% completion, 2,677 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. I'm not going to compare the rushing stats, of course, because Dante Moore does not run like Mariota does. In fact, the only guy that really could, who's on the roster, is, of course, Luke Moga. So I think statistically, that's a pretty fair expectation, ballpark in your mind to have of what Dante Moore puts on the field this year. And that was in 13 games, by the way, 12 games, and then the bowl game against Kansas State was that season? Yeah, that was the Kansas State year. I think that's a pretty fair expectation. Because frankly, when I was going back and doing, a statistical breakdown of this and seeing what Mariota's numbers were, I thought his freshman year stats were going to be higher. And I actually think Dante Moore could throw for slightly more yards. I think he could get around 3,000 pretty easily with the weapons that he's got. I'll talk about the offensive line later. I think that's going to be really good. I think his interceptions maybe will be a touch higher. I frankly don't remember Mariota throwing 6 that year because he quickly got the reputation of he never really throws interceptions. But Dante Moore, if you remember, and most of you I'm sure do from his time at UCLA, he struggled protecting the football. It is the biggest knock that you can throw on him. It's why he was removed from the starting role after capturing it early in the season from Ethan Garbers, who is an average at best quarterback. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but Moore didn't step into a situation as a true freshman and light the world on fire. But the reason I think it's kind of fair, not entirely, I don't think you can look at Oregon's only Heisman Trophy winner ever and say, well, Dante, got to be that guy, man. Got to go out. Like, I'm not placing that sort of expectation on him. However, as I've talked about, and we've established in this spring, and I'll explain more later on today's show, he's got a pretty darn good situation around him. And Mariota had DeAnthony Thomas in his second year, and Chip Kelly's his head coach in his heyday, and a good receiving core, and the O-line was solid, and the defense did enough. Like, he had a lot of round. Well, Dante Moore is coming into a newer roster with not a lot of returning production, but boy, you got a really good receiving core. You got a good tandem of running backs. You should have a good offensive line. You've got one of the most unique players in all of college football at tight end in Kenyon Sadiq. And though I don't necessarily think the defense can be as dominant as it was last year, should still be good. Should still be one of the 3 or 4 best units in the Big Ten. So I think all the tools are there for Dante Moore to go out and lead Oregon to a double-digit win season and for him to have numbers that are in the high 60s from a completion percentage standpoint. And, you know, the reason I say I think Moore's yardage can be a little higher is because Will Stein's offense has proven it's really productive. It's really good. The numbers are always solid. The last 2 years, granted, they were more experienced than Dante Moore, but Gabriel and Nix both set individual records for themselves with regards to completion percentage. So why shouldn't Dante Moore be expected to do the same? Now, Mariota went out 68.5% as a redshirt freshman, and that's one of the reasons I look at Dante Moore and say, yeah, you've played more, no pun intended, going into your first game as the Ducks starter this year than Marcus Mariota had when he first set foot on the field. So I do think that that's reasonable. And if you're a quarterback that completes in the high 60s, and you know each of the last 2 years with Stein, quarterbacks have been in the 70s from a completion percentage statistical standpoint. And if that happens again this year, boy, I will be gassing up the Oregon offense going into 2026, where you'll have DeCorian Moore going into his second year. Jeremiah McLaughlin probably is one of your top receivers as well. Gatlin Bear, 5-star receiver coming in 2026. Like, list goes on. Boy, that'd be really good. But anyway, I don't expect that. I do think at least being in the mid-60s, if not in the upper 60s for completion percentage, I think that's reasonable. And that 2012 Oregon team was more run-centric with Chip Kelly at the helm than this offense is going to be in 2025 because it's the same offense we've seen for the last couple of years. So I think I'll say 68% completion percentage, at least 3,000 yards passing. I don't know if I expect 30 or more touchdowns, but probably 25 in that sort of range, and keep the interceptions in the single digits. I think that's a reasonable expectation statistically for Dante Moore this fall. And I think if he stays that expectation in 2026, I know that for me, it'll skyrocket. It will jump. Mariota's best season was in his third year, but he jumped from just under 2,700 yards to over 3,600 his second year with the Ducks, and then his third year went to over 4,400. So we'll save that conversation for someday in the future, but let me know what your expectations are in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all that good stuff. I think Dante Moore is going to have a good offensive line this year. I think he'll have a good one next year too, even though a lot of change up front. I think it's okay. First, this episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. All-in-one convenience is what they are all about. You can not juggle multiple apps. You can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, even plan long-term goals. That's all right there in the Monarch Money app. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Get your finances in order and take control at monarchmoney.com. I'm sure my everydayers out there on YouTube will notice. Different setup. Back in the great state of Oregon for the summer. So I'll be hanging out for like 4 months. Life is hard. Very hard. Anyway, so Oregon rocks. As a state. And as a school. You know, that too. But Oregon rocks. And I think the offensive line is going to rock pretty solidly going into next year. So Going into spring, I felt good about the offensive line. Coming out, my grade remains unchanged. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Because this is a group of guys that has got plenty of youth in there. I think the way they've recruited the trenches in the last couple cycles comes into the fold more on the field in 2026. They, of course, have several transfers up there. I think you are going to have... Last year it was, just from the starting bunch. Marcus Harper was an Oregon high school recruit. Poncho was an Oregon high school recruit. So too was Josh Connerly. And, Ajani Cornelius was a transfer from the FCS ranks who did very well, of course. Then that right guard position was a revolving doors. They tried to figure out all sorts of stuff. But I think there's just one more transfer in what I expect to be the starting five, or what I think will be the starting five, than what you had a year ago. But next year, I think that ratio could change depending on what happens with Poncho at center. I've seen, a couple like PFF posts out there about, the top offensive line prospects for 2026, or the top returning linemen. And Isaiah World, Nevada transfer who will start at left tackle, is on there. And then so is Poncho. And I think that's awesome. I think he could be in for a really, really big season. Will he win the Remington Award like Jackson Powers Johnson did? I don't know. That's a pretty high bar to clear, but he was good last year. Make no mistake about it. So every scholarship player that is in the offensive line room is as follows. Dimitri Manning, and thankfully, at least from what I've seen, heard, read, been told, all that sort of stuff, this room went into the spring game without any major injuries and came out of the spring game without any major injuries, which is great because last year, of course, that was a big storyline, and that's why depth matters so tremendously much. Every single season, I'd like for Oregon to go into it having at least 7, if not 8 offensive linemen that you feel pretty good about. So the room, in no order, is Dimitri Manning, Douglas Utu, Devin Brooks, Trent Ferguson, Zaire Addison, Fox Crater, Bryce Bolton, Charlie Pickard, Alex Harkey, Poncho, Kavika Rogers, Davey Yulee, Emmanuel Prenon, Isaiah World, Matthew Bedford, Gernorris Wilson, and Lipe Moala. So there are plenty of bodies available in there, and I don't think they're going to have a freshman starting or even playing up front. It's a pretty rare thing to... I don't know that I should say exceedingly rare. Oregon has played true freshmen in significant roles throughout, not starting per se, but notable roles. Poncho was the first guy off the bench. He was the 6th offensive lineman in 2023. Josh Connerly, of course, played in the jumbo package role in 2022. So it's not impossible. It's tough as a true freshman to see the field, but that's usually true for trenches. So going into the spring game, my expected starting 5 was Isaiah World, Nevada transfer at left tackle, the USC and former Wyoming transfer Emmanuel Prenon at left guard, Poncho at center, Matthew Bedford, the Indiana transfer who was hurt basically all of last year at right guard, and Gernorris Wilson at right tackle. I continue to think, this is just my gut, I think Gernorris Wilson winds up starting at right tackle. So one of the plays, I like the way the offensive line looked. I watched the spring game after some other people did because I had some SEU broadcasts that I was doing. So, I just went back and watched it on Big Ten Plus. And I'd heard going into that game, and James Crepia, of course, got shot down pretty epically by Dan Lanning in the post-game presser when he made a point or was trying to make a point about the offensive line and how they got dominated by the defensive line. But I'd heard that from a couple of other places in different ways or from other folks as well. That, the offensive line really got worked by the defensive line. And when I watched the game, one of my biggest takeaways was it was definitely advantage defensive line, which you would expect because you're playing offensive line combos that probably haven't played together before. But I didn't think they performed poorly or just got completely demolished and looked incompetent or anything like that. There were certainly snaps where the defensive line got home. You know why? Oregon's defensive line is sick. It is phenomenally awesome. I love the way they have recruited and built depth at that position over the last several years has been So good. I think you can make a case that's the position group Dan Lanning and the staff have recruited, developed, retained, and established depth the best at compared to any other one. Maybe receiver would be the other comparison. And no surprise, those are my two highest grades. They were going into the spring game and coming out of it as well. Those units are really, really good. So I think that those five, that World, Prenon, Poncho, Bedford, and Wilson will be the starting five. The one that's up in the air, Alex Harkey was at Texas State. I don't think he's the most experienced guy. Gernorris Wilson was the jumbo package tackle a season ago. That was, of course, a prelude. Is that the word I'm looking for? Preceding move to Josh Connerly being a starting tackle. So I can see it from that standpoint. But I watched Wilson the spring game, thought he looked really good. I mean, one of the biggest individual offensive line plays was on the Jaden Lamar long touchdown run. Gernorris Wilson just dominated a one-on-one rep with Mateo Uiagalelei, who will be a top 10 pick in all likelihood in next year's NFL draft. So I watched that and thought, kind of confirms what I've been thinking in the back of my mind. It was just one play, but it's pretty notable that he went out and just moved an NFL caliber player in the way that he did. I don't think that is... I don't think that's something that can be ignored. I thought Alex Harkey had a fine day as well, and overall, the offensive line, I thought did some good things. Fox Crater, redshirt freshman, got beat a couple times. I think he's probably another year of development away before he could see the field in a significant role. But, I liked the depth. I didn't feel like there were, massive weaknesses or just lack of talent or bodies or anything like that. And Oregon's pulled in some pretty highly rated recruits. Zaire Addison and Douglas Utu were two of the higher rated guys at their positions coming into or coming out of high school. So I like him. I really do. And going into the spring game, I had him rated at a solid B, which I'm a tough grader. Remember, C is average. We're not having the tight end room discussion right now. We might do it again tomorrow. But no, we're not actually going to have that. But I'll talk about the tight ends more tomorrow. But C is average, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think this unit is at a solid B. I really was impressed, and I was expecting, after what I'd heard from various other people commenting on the game, that I thought I was going to be downgrading this to maybe a B- or a C+, which I'd still feel fine about. It's still above average compared to the rest of the Big Ten, which is how I'm evaluating these sorts of these position groups and giving out these sorts of grades. But yeah, I'd put them at a B. I think they could have a higher ceiling than that because you're working in 4 new players up front. That's going to be tough. Like there's going to be an adjustment period. It's different than last year, though. I think they'll have more clarity, particularly because Poncho will start at center right away. I think they'll have more clarity on what unit they're going to run, what the rotations are going to be. I fully expect that, your 2 guys that come off the bench primarily are going to be Kavika Rogers and Davey Uli again, who we know are capable of filling in a pinch and doing a good job. I think you'll have Alex Harkey, the Texas State transfer, as your first tackle off the bench. Who's the jumbo offensive lineman remains to be seen. Probably Harkey, be my guess. But overall, I feel good about this unit. I'm going to give them about a 2-3 week grace period during the season before I give a full assessment on how they're doing and how they can do the rest of the year. But overall, I think this is a good unit for Dante Moore to be behind. So that's it for football chatter today, but that's not it for the show. If you were at Jane Sanders Stadium last night, good for you. If you were watching on TV, good for you as well. I was doing that. If you were not, you missed out. Super Regional in Eugene. I sent a tweet out a while back that the most underrated coach on campus in the Oregon Athletic Department is Melissa Lombardi. I think that reputation is slowly starting to change, and people are realizing, oh, she's really good. Yeah, she is really good. Des Patman, also very good. Walk-off, 3-run dinger, bottom of the 7th, season on the line, 1 out, 1st and 3rd, tied at 7. This was a wild game. Oregon went down 4-0 off the bat. A pop-up that should have been caught wasn't. And I don't know what's going on with Lindsey Grind. I hope she figures it out by next weekend in the Super Regional against Liberty. But the pop-up is dropped, results in a grand slam, and Oregon, and this was on the heels, by the way, of a dominant win by the Ducks earlier in the day. I think it was like 15-5. And it was the most runs Stanford had allowed in a game in a couple of years. And that was with the game. That was with the season on the line. Oregon lost in this tournament to Stanford, who housed them. And Oregon had to go out and win their next 3 games and beat Stanford twice on Saturday or on Sunday, and they did. This was phenomenal. And I tell you what, I was having some Oregon football demon flashbacks to 2012 because here was Stanford coming to Eugene and just thwarting postseason hopes of a national championship caliber team. I was watching it happen, and I was just thinking back to DeAnthony Thomas not throwing a block, Maldonado missing the field goal. Like, it was just all rushing back to me, and then it was all gone. This was a wild game. Bottom of the 6th, Oregon's down 7-6 after stranding 2 in the 5th. They got 1. 1st and 2nd, though, ground into a double play, which in softball is a pretty rare thing to come across. And so that was taking the air out of the stadium a little. But Jane Sanders Stadium was rocking. It was rocking. Shout out to everybody that was there. Get there next weekend for the Super Regional because I'll tell you about their opponent in just a moment. You're not going to believe it. You're probably going to like it, though. So Oregon goes out and gets a leadoff triple in the bottom of the 6th. Next 2 batters strike out, and then a swinging bunt results in the run coming home. There was an obstruction play at the plate correctly called by the umpire. That was in the 5th inning that scored a run. She would have been out, but the path was blocked. It was a correct call, but a gutsy one to make in that situation. But this was a crazy game. And it looked like Oregon was about to have another postseason letdown. I said going into this regional tournament that, Oregon's hosting for, I think it was the first time since 2018. And with the season that this team just had, it would have been a major letdown to not get out of the regional tournament. And boy, they came close. They got destroyed by Stanford. They go out and they handle Weber State out of the Big Sky. And then they have to beat Stanford twice in the same day. And they just found a way to do it. It was awesome. The football team was there, came running out onto the field to congratulate them and celebrate with them. It was great. So now Oregon gets some time to ponder how they're going to handle Liberty. I'm trying not to be overconfident. I don't want to be that guy. It's just Oregon's last 2 encounters with the Flames in postseason settings. Football won 45-6, I think was the score. And the basketball game was over by the 8-minute mark in the first half. Maybe even sooner. So, Fiesta Bowl, round of 64, no prop. Super Regional, trip to Oklahoma City on the line. Liberty, though, potentially, we'll see how it goes next week. The best of 3. Pretty sure it's best of 3. Did Oregon a bit of a solid here. They knocked off number 1 Texas A&M. It's the first time a number 1 seed has lost in a regional ever. It's the first time that has happened since they started seeding in college softball. And so this was such a phenomenal game. And the atmosphere was really good, and my heart was racing. I was on the edge of my seat, and I'm thinking, oh no, Stanford really? And they found a way. And Des Patman, the bat flip, stare down, are you not entertained sort of vibe. Dan Lanning had to be smiling, thinking, I bet she watches Ducks versus them. She wasn't doing the thumbs down, but she just was running to first as she watched the ball fly away for a 10-7 win on her home field, and just kind of had her hands out going to first, like, oh yeah, I just did that. It was awesome. It was phenomenally awesome. So they deserve more than a shout out here on the show, and so they get more than a shout out here on the show. And I'm just Liberty just pulled the upset and showed they could beat number 1 Texas A&M. Better not take them lightly. Was that kind of their Super Bowl? Emotional letdown? Feels like it could be there. Oregon at home is a dangerous team. I like the Ducks' chances. And, I mean, it's Liberty. I don't want this to become a segment of, man, remember when you were that good? Let's go back to the time where you're feeling that confident there. This team got a chance. Team has got a great chance. So hosting a super regional, get to Eugene next weekend. Something I also wanted to mention before I get out of here for today that I did not mention last week because I wasn't able to squeeze it into a show. Oregon basketball has moved on from Miles Goodman because of charges that were filed against him by Penn State, where he was transferring from. This once again, and I think Oregon made the right move given the accusations that came out and the apparent credibility of those. You can look them up if you like. I don't care to discuss them here on the show, but the state of Oregon's front court is, I don't know if you ever watched the World Series of Poker on ESPN randomly as a kid, or if you still do, but all the chips, when the guy pushes all the chips in the middle of the table, that's where Oregon's at with Nate Biddle. Now, Goodman would have been the 4th big this year. He wouldn't have been a major player. I think he would have seen the court. And then next year, he would have been a guy that plays more. How much? TBD. He was definitely more of a long-term investment. Like, he was a Dante Moore of sorts, or maybe like a Nico Reed. Nico Reed transferred to Oregon from Colorado, and he was on the 2 deep, but not a starter in 2023. And this past year, he's one of Oregon's best corners. That could have been the Miles Goodman playing time trajectory. And, he's in the 6'10", 6'11 range, athletic big. But Oregon's front court right now consists of Sean Stewart, the Ohio State transfer, and KJ Evans, back for year 3. We have not heard. I would love to hear this week from Nate Biddle. It could drag out into the middle of June as he explores the NBA draft process. That is his right. But if Nate Biddle does not come back, I think he is. I'm not 100% confident until I see it happen. But this just further solidifies, like, he's got to come back, or that could be problematic. So, Nate, if you're listening to or watching this, you should definitely come back and get Oregon back to the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2021. Just like where Oregon softball is for the first time since 2023. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.